Hi guys, and welcome back to Guitar Shed Videos. Today what I want to talk to you about is actually some quick tips you can remember when memorizing the fretboard to help make it a lot easier. Now the first thing you want to address is, why do you want to memorize the fretboard? Well, that's actually very simple. Memorizing the fretboard is one of the best things you can do to expand your playing. What it will allow you to do is derive scales from intervals without really knowing to need scale patterns on various places on the fretboard, which can actually be a real hassle and can kind of wind up depriving you of an understanding of how the scales actually work, as opposed to just knowing the patterns of them. And so you can actually gain a lot from knowing how the fretboard works, knowing the intervals on it, and knowing, where you actually are on the fretboard in relation to the note. So, first thing you need to do, know your strings, E, A, D, G, B, E, in ascending order from lowest frequency to highest frequency. If you don't already know that, memorize it, replay the video, I just gave it to you, E, A, D, G, B, E. I'm assuming most of you already know that though. So without any further ado, let's continue to what you actually need to know in memorizing the fretboard. Second thing is, basically you do need to understand the concept of whole tones, semitones, and how they relate to the fretboard and scales. A whole tone is considered the distance, or the musical distance, between any two notes, any two whole notes. So let's take, for example, G, the ending of the musical scale, and A, the beginning of the musical scale, or the jump into the next octave of that scale. Between G and A is a whole tone, or two semitones. A semitone is a half whole tone. Now, on the fretboard, one fret represents one semitone. Now, the semitones have their own notes with two exceptions, and I'll get into that in just a second. So again, let's take the example of between G and A. You would have a semitone note, which can be denoted either G sharp or A flat. Doesn't really matter how you denote it when you're playing, because the fact of it is, for our purposes here, they're the same thing. It's one semitone, or the note that represents one semitone, between the note G and the note A. Now there are two exceptions to this, as I was saying. Between B and C, and between E and F, there is no semitone note. Every other combination of notes is going to have a semitone note between it. So, knowing that, you can then, knowing that and knowing the note that your string begins on, which is actually the open string or the 0th fret of your guitar, if you want to denote it that way, what you can actually do is you can derive from that up the fretboard. So let's take, for example, the E string. Low E, high E, it doesn't matter. They actually work exactly the same way. Your 0th note, or your open string, is E. Your first fret is F, because keep in mind, there is no semitone note between E and F, so there isn't, an F flat or, an E sharp. There isn't that denotation between it. Next, on your scale, you'd go up to the 2nd fret, which is then one semitone note above F. So that would actually be F sharp, or if you choose to denote it that way, G flat. One more semitone note up, going to the 3rd fret of that string, gets you to G, and so on and so forth up the scale. Remembering, of course, that when you hit between B and C, there isn't going to be a semitone note there. So knowing this, you can actually derive any note on the fretboard from knowing where you're starting. And keep in mind, the 12th fret of any string is going to be the same as the open note. So you actually kind of cut your learning in half by knowing that, because what you're actually doing is you can treat that 12th fret exactly as if it was the 0th fret of your guitar. So again, starting from the 12th fret, let's say again on the E string, it would go exactly the same way. E, F, F sharp, G, and so on and so forth. So again, by knowing that, you can actually construct the various scales without really needing to memorize the pattern, as long as you can extrapolate in your mind from a point on the guitar that you know, for example, one of the open string or the 12th fret, or a note you may have previously memorized along the fretboard. So what that's going to do for you, again, it allows you to construct the scales very easily. It allows you to kind of play around with the notes in the scales, aka improvisation, kind of the basis of a lot of styles of lead playing. And it's just going to allow you to understand how the fretboard works and how the intervals between your notes work a lot better than just memorizing scale patterns. And I always encourage you to memorize the intervals more than the scale patterns. Scale patterns can be very helpful sometimes, but you should at least memorize the intervals along with those scale patterns so that you really know what's going on, because the more you understand, the more you're going to be able to play around with it and kind of turn it into your own style of playing. Okay, so that's kind of the tips for memorizing the fretboard. Grab your guitar, just check it out. You know, if you haven't memorized the fretboard already, or if you're kind of in the process of doing it, just play up those notes from either your 0th fret or your 12th fret, and figure out, hey, this is this note, this is that note, kind of get your mind working along that basis, and you'll actually be surprised how fast you'll progress with it. I'm also going to include a link down in the description, two links actually. The one I always include is for the landing page for the Guitar Shed Music website. That's on every video, so check that out if you haven't already. But I'm also going to include a link to an article I put up, I think maybe 4 or 5 days ago, something like that, regarding the modes and how to derive them from the major scales and how to use them in your playing. The modes are a really cool way to create mood within your playing, and it's a great way to combine kind of two lessons with memorizing the fretboard if you're going to be, playing around with the fretboard, memorizing it, and also learn the modes at the same time, and learn how to derive them from your major scales, and you'll be surprised really how fast your playing will kind of progress along that line, because you'll be able to not only understand the intervals of the modes, but also how they're working, how you're deriving them from the major scales, and you'll be able to add a lot of mood and a lot of feeling to your playing without really a whole lot of extra effort than it would take to just learn the fretboard on its own. Alright guys, like I said, grab your guitars, check it out. If you haven't already, check out, like I said, I'll include down in the description a link to the Guitar Shed Music website itself. There's a lot of great articles on there, and have a great day. See you next time.